When I had that first shot of heroin intravenously, I thought I'd found everything I would ever need in life. And that's what makes it so dangerous, because you spend your time always chasing that first feeling which you never get back. And the next morning I met my counsellor, my teacher in treatment, and he explained very kindly that I wasn't special and different, that I was a bog standard drug addict and alcoholic, but he was. And he said, will you make a commitment that you'll at least stay here till Monday? I said to myself, Andrew, you really need to do this because you're not going to get this chance again. You won't live long enough. If you're on a plane that's about to crash and someone gives you a parachute, for God's sake, pull the ripcord.
Hello and welcome to 12 Steps and 12 Questions. My name is Silvio and I'm an addict. This pod is full of personal and inspirational stories of recovery from addiction. And in every episode I'll ask each guest the same 12 questions about their life, addiction and recovery. Quick warning, there will be some graphic descriptions and a healthy amount of swearing. For this episode, please welcome Andrew.
Hi listeners, welcome to this episode of 12 Steps and 12 Questions. You all know the deal by now. Please like and subscribe to share the message, and if you'd like to be on this pod, ping me a message. My email is in the show notes. That said, let's get to our guest for today. Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks for asking me, Silvio. My name's Andrew, I'm 58 years old and I'm a recovered drug addict and alcoholic.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, Andrew. We've got 12 questions to get through, so let's get started. Question 1. Did you have any adverse childhood experiences?
Yeah, Silvio, I did. My mum and dad were a very, inverted commas, normal couple. They met through the Baptist church. They were very devoted to each other from everything I've been told. And 2 years before I was born, my sister Catherine was born with Down syndrome, congenital heart defect, and various medical complications. I came along 2 years later, and the doctors, when my sister had born, had told my mum and dad that you know, she'd never get any better, and they advised my mum and dad to sort of put her in care. And my mum and dad would hear nothing of it, you know. And yeah, when I came along, sort of, my sister copied me once I started walking and talking and everything, followed me about, and, you know, that sort of, that unquestioning, unconditional love that Down syndrome kids have, you know. And when I was about 3 or 4, my dad became very ill with kidney infection and contracted pneumonia, and he died when I was 4.
Right.
And 2 years later, my sister died. And my childhood was punctuated by ambulances arriving in the middle of the night. I was whisked off by an aunt or something, you know, while all this was going on. And when I look back on it, and I held this resentment for a long time, you know, I was never told what happened to my dad and sister until I was quite a lot older. And that was to protect me. You know, my mum was only doing her best to protect me, but I went through a phase of sort of blaming a lot on that, you know, that I didn't understand what had happened. And I used to have a recurring nightmare of a figure somewhere in my subconscious I knew was my dad, sort of walking through this sort of meadow, flowers and everything, and being consumed by this abstract blackness, this darkness. And, you know, I remember thinking it's going to come for me. And for a long time, until I was sort of almost 10 years old, I couldn't sleep with the light off. I had to sleep with the light on.
So you felt persecuted, I suppose, followed by this?
Yeah. And yeah, as I say, it was a sort of abstract darkness that swallowed up a figure that I somehow knew was my father. And consequently, I grew up a very fearful, anxious child. I was very shy, very sensitive, didn't like being away from my mum. I didn't make friends easily, I didn't mix in groups. I think I was scared that if I got close to anyone, they'd be taken away from me. I didn't do team sports because I was scared if I got something wrong, the rest of the team would hate me. And when I played rugby later in life, I found out I was right about that all along. Yeah, but I was academically quite bright. And when I was 10, I took scholarships for independent schools, and I won a scholarship to an independent school. And I was a relatively one of a few relatively poor kids in quite a privileged environment. You know, a lot of the kids, well, some of the kids were brought to school by their dad's chauffeurs, you know, and I went to school on a bus in a second-hand uniform. And I think that reinforced my feeling of being a bit of an outsider, you know, a bit of an imposter maybe. Yeah, and I still flourished academically, but I was very shy and didn't mix a lot. You know, I tended to have one best friend, and that would be it. You know.
Was there? I mean, you suffered some real heavy losses really, really early on in your life. Was there any support given to you? I mean, this would have been, you know, at a time where that might not have been the done thing. I'm guessing, but
it was sort of. It was almost unspoken. I mean, we had a very close family. I had lots of aunts and uncles, and because my mum had to go back to work, and as I say, I hated being separated from my mum. You know, I was looked after a lot by aunts, uncles, my grandma, who I adored. Yeah, so I was sort of moved about a bit during the day, when, you know, being picked up from school when I was very young, that sort of thing. But yeah, it was almost not talked about. But I remember growing up with, my mum doted on me and wrapped me in cotton wool, but there was an atmosphere of sadness in the house, as you can imagine.
Of course, yeah. Do you find that, did your mum and maybe the people around you try to compensate? I'd imagine they did, you know, for the loss of your dad in particular.
Absolutely, yeah. I was sort of emotionally spoiled, I suppose. You know.
What does that look like, being emotionally spoiled?
Well, I was cosseted, I think, you know. I was really cosseted and, you know, everyone, my aunts and everyone sort of made such a fuss of me. I was made to feel the centre of attention a lot of the time.
Right, so you're made to feel special.
Yes.
Now, I was made to feel very special when I was a kid, and this sort of exceptionalism that came along with this is such a feature of my illness. Is this sort of playing the tape forward just a little bit here? Is this something that you'd say about yourself as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it's a strange one, because it's that feeling of sort of feeling less than on one level and trying to be exceptional on another level, you know.
Yeah. I had a not dissimilar experience in my childhood, as in I was sent to quite a quote-unquote smart school, different school system, so you can't quite compare it, but still, you know, and I was definitely one of the fewer children there who sort of grew up on a council estate, and, you know, whose dad didn't work in somewhere white collar in any case, right? So I felt quite left out and not as good as, obviously less than, as you did. Do you think this is also something that contributed to what was already sort of a personality that was sort of being made to feel special and so on? So a further, what's the word I'm looking for here? A further sort of taking you away from being with other kids as normal, let's put it that way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, as I say, I felt like a bit of an outsider, you know.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of addicts say that this in shares a lot. I felt like I didn't really fit in.
Yeah. Everybody says that. I just couldn't come up with the word right there. Yeah, exactly, like an outsider, exactly right, yeah. So you were academically bright, and so you did well, and you got some self-confidence, I take it, from that, right? Yeah. But with all that being said, as I said, you had some really difficult losses really, really early on, and you were this closeted kid, emotionally closeted. At some point, and that is our question too, leading up to it, at some point drugs and alcohol were introduced into your life. Our second question is, what did the fun times look like, the times where you got hooked?
Well, I think I discovered alcohol probably about 14 or 15. My mate sort of was taller, looked a bit older, and came up with the idea one weekend, you know, to get a bottle of something from the off license and go up to the forest. You know, I didn't start with like a small beer at a party. I started with two of us with a bottle of vodka, which we polished off that day. And we're both quite sick and quite unwell. And and I thought, this is good. I'll do this again. And
even though you were sick.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what alcohol did for me, it's easy to say in hindsight, but alcohol gave me that false confidence that I lacked. And as soon as I discovered alcohol, I could sort of be part of a crowd. You know, there was the cool crowd at school, you know, the ones that were usually in a bit of trouble and all that. and I could join that crowd. They were already going to parties and that, and it gave me that false confidence to be part of the crowd. And alcohol sort of did a lot for me in that respect. You know, I thought I'd found the answer to my shyness, to my feeling left out, and you know, and most importantly, it gave me the confidence to talk to girls.
Right.
And yeah, and I became sexually quite active at school, quite young, really. I suppose about 14, 15, and I was quite promiscuous at school, and it was mostly on the back of alcohol. And obviously I wasn't drinking at school in those days, although I do remember before my O-levels, my mate, you know, we had a hip flask of vodka before we went into our O-levels.
Did you really?
Yeah.
You were 15 or something at this point?
Yeah, 15, 16. And it was the weekends, you know, I always look forward to the weekends where we'd drink and go to parties and stuff like that. And I think, you know, cannabis came in pretty quickly after that. I'm showing my age because it was hashish in those days, not weed.
And mine.
And immediately I started smoking dope with another guy from school who was quite well off and had a car by this stage or whatever. You know, we'd smoke dope before school, during break time, during lunchtime, before exams, you know, at every given opportunity we'd smoke dope. And it's like all my addictions, you know, it escalated pretty quickly. As soon as I found something, I was onto it. And during my school years, I suppose I started taking amphetamines at weekends, LSD. During my late teens and my early 20s, I took a lot of LSD.
Did you at the time, at any sort of moment, sort of think to yourself, bloody hell, this is getting a bit out of hand? Did you have any worries about this at all? Or were you just thinking, I'm having the best time here?
No,
What's
I
your
don't
problem?
think I had any worries. No, I don't think I had any awareness around that at all. I just thought this is great fun, you know. I mean, I should have said when I was growing up, when I was about 8 or 9 and my classmates were listening to sort of ABBA and the Osmonds, my hero was Keith Richards, you know, which probably didn't bode well for the future. And I used to read about Keith Richards and his drug use. And I think I prepared myself. I thought, this is what I'm going to do when I get older. I'm going to take drugs. And I loved drugs.
Yeah.
I loved all drugs.
Yeah.
And yeah, those were the party years, you know. And yeah, and I think I had this sort of very unrealistic view of myself. I thought it was a lifestyle choice, and I thought I was some sort of rock and roll star taking all these drugs, and I'm, you know, it was like a badge of honor that I took more drugs than anyone else.
Absolutely. It's a very sort of pervasive kind of fantasy that we have, isn't it? That just because we take drugs, and I know you play a bit of guitar, I play a bit of guitar, that all of a sudden we think of ourselves as being Sir Keith Richards or anybody else who's quite a lot cooler, who can play much better licks than we can, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I hear you. You had quite a long time then, or quite some time then, when you were, quote unquote, enjoying your drugs and enjoying the lifestyle. There didn't seem to be any consequences at this point.
No, not really. I mean, I dabbled a bit in heroin before I left school. And I became part of a group of friends from outside school that I'd met in the pubs sort of near where my school was, you know. And we became, and some of them are still friends today. And we became like a group. We partied at weekends, we went to a lot of gigs, we did music festivals and all that, you know. And they took a lot of drugs, but they had boundaries with drugs. I didn't, you know.
Did you know that at the time?
No, I didn't realise it at all. I mean, heroin was a sort of taboo in that crowd. You know, you didn't go there, but I did.
Right. Did they know you did?
Yes, they did. And they sort of like, you know, I got told off about it, warned about it.
I often wonder about my own history with regards to heroin in particular, because heroin was always looked at as the drug that you should just never go to, right? So in my crowd, you know, it was just, if you did that, it meant that it was something really seriously wrong with you. Now, of course, there is something very seriously wrong with me, but I didn't know it at the time, right? And I thought because I was taking different drugs, you know, that things were still okay, you know. And I do wonder sometimes what would have happened. And I mean, I know what would have happened, but you know, how things would have panned out. And there was that thing already about heroin then back in the day also for you, but it didn't stop you.
No, in fact, I think the fact that everyone told me it was so dangerous made me want to do it more.
Yeah, right. Man.
You know, I had this very nihilistic view of things, you know.
I was quite scared of drugs at the time, right? So before I tried something new, I debated with myself for a long time. I was always really worried, what's going to happen if I do this and then that happens, or, you know, I was always really, you know, but then maybe also intuitively knowing that I latch onto things. There's something in me that just latches onto things and will just not let go. Did you not have anything like this, where you were just taking things as they were coming?
Yeah, I don't think I was aware of it at the time. I think I was so full on, you know, this is a lifestyle, you know. This is rock and roll, man, you know.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any fear around drugs. You know, I'd take anything at the time. I remember, I was reading like Hunter S. Thompson and people like that.
Of course.
And, you know, and in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, he inhales ether, which like, you know, makes his legs go. And, you know, and my mate had a verruca and was prescribed raw ether for his foot. And I said, don't put it on your foot, let's inhale it. And we did that, you know.
A lot of people on this pod, you know, talking to me about all sorts of stuff that they took, but ether I think is the first. So let's have a quick word about ether then. What's that like?
I think it's like sort of for physically, I suppose. It's like, if you can imagine a cross between drinking a litre of vodka in 2 seconds and sniffing amyl nitrate at the same time. It makes your heart rate race, your legs go from underneath you, your head buzz.
I mean, it's what they knock people out with, you know.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
They did at some point
great.
anyway. We thought it was great. Of course you did. Yeah. I'd have probably thought the same thing, you know. So you came out of school at some point. Here you are, you're rock and roll, you're having a great time, and there's no consequences at this point. You're not fearful either. You just made this lifestyle choice. You're a really cool guy. You're like a Keith Richards sort of a person, right? Our question 3 is, and as ever, I'm quite aware that we might be covering quite a long stretch of time here. But still, question 3 is, what were your worst consequences and finally your rock bottom?
The consequences started when I left school, I suppose. I went to work. I went to work in the news industry in Fleet Street, and which is what I always wanted to do. I wanted to be a writer or a journalist, you know. And I got a job in that and I progressed in that. And the company was bought by Reuters news agency, big corporate entity, by which time I was editor, but I was drinking alcoholically. I had since I left school. I mean, it was a heavy drinking environment in that industry, but I was a heavy drinker in that environment. And by that time, I was really out of control with my drinking and drug use. And I worked for them for 7 years. And when Reuters took over, my way of doing things didn't actually fit their corporate approach.
Right.
You know, no shit, Sherlock. And I was sort of paid off to leave. So that was the first big consequence, that I lost my drug. I lost my job because of my drinking drug use.
Yeah. Were you drinking daily at this point?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
You know, still no questions to yourself? Look, Andrew,
yeah,
what is
I
it
think
you're
I was
doing?
getting slightly aware that it was a problem, but I was very much in denial. I only really felt aware of it was when I woke up in the morning feeling really ill or something, and I soon fixed that by having another drink.
Hair of the dog.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was not long after that. I'd been dabbling with heroin all the way through. And it was not long after that that a dealer injected me with heroin for the first time. And when I had that first shot of heroin intravenously, I thought I'd found everything I would ever need in life. The words ease and comfort could have been invented for that feeling. It was like being wrapped in a warm cotton wool blanket that the world couldn't get through. It really is, and that's what makes it so dangerous, because you spend your time always chasing that first feeling which you never get back. And even then, and I've quickly became a daily intravenous user of heroin. And
now, looking at it from today's perspective, what is it that it gives you that you can't give to yourself, right? Is it harmony? Is it protection? Self-care, quote unquote, of course. What is it?
I think it was, I couldn't deal with life really very well without drugs, and that particular drug really makes you feel protected from the world, because no matter what's going on outside, you don't really care. you know. This is in hindsight, because I don't think I was aware of it at the time. I just knew it made me feel really good, and it made me feel protected from the outside world.
But still, how old were you then?
About 24, I suppose.
Right, 24. So at 24, you know that heroin is dangerous.
Yeah.
Right? So you knew that was the case.
Yeah.
But you still pursued it almost every day.
Yeah.
And did you not feel any fear at this point either?
I didn't. I think by that stage I had a bit of a death wish, to be honest.
Ah, okay.
You know, I didn't care whether I lived or not.
Yeah, okay.
I was really reckless in that respect.
Right, okay. So Reuters let you go.
Yeah.
Right. And what happened then?
Well, I had some money, so I went with some friends to Italy for a while, thinking that would get me away from drugs, but I went to Rimini, which was like party town central. And there were more drugs there than there were here. So my habit continued out there. Not daily, because it wasn't quite so easy to get hold of if you didn't have the right connections, but I was using sort of acid out there, amphetamines, ecstasy, weed, hash, and heroin when I could get it. And I sort of was in and out there for 18 months, I suppose, you know.
Proper geographical.
Yeah, it was a typical geographical, really, that didn't work. And I came back to England, and a friend of mine got me a job for a while. So I had some money, and immediately I was using daily again. I was using intravenously daily again. And very quickly, I mean, the consequences of heroin came thick and fast. I sold everything that I owned. You know, I had a massive record collection. That went for next to nothing, you know. My guitar went for next to nothing. I sold absolutely everything I owned, and quite a lot that I didn't own that someone else owned. You know, I sold my family's stuff when they were on holiday. I ended up begging at one point. I became a drug dealer. I worked for a drug dealer. And at one point I was working for this drug dealer, and I was taking drugs into prison for two guys as part of my job, quote unquote. And both of those two guys were doing 5 years each for being caught taking drugs into prison for the same guy that I was working for.
No. Right.
Which sounds pretty crazy, and it was pretty crazy.
And again, he had no awareness.
No, because I was just relying on doing that to get my drugs.
Yeah.
And that's all I cared about.
Yeah. So you were physically dependent by then.
Absolutely, totally physically dependent.
Yeah.
And I had jobs during my heroin use, on and off, because I could function while I had heroin. The only time I couldn't function is when I didn't get it, you know. And that's the only time I was aware of the consequences, is when I didn't get my drug, you know, because I was ill and I was like.
Did you ever, in this time, I mean, of course, it's a very stressful life, you know, having to get X amount of, heroin every day so that you don't start feeling the effects of withdrawal. You know, so you have to get it from somewhere. You have to, make the money first, and you have to get it, and you have to inject, and it's a stressful life.
Yeah,
it's a stressful life. But again, were there any moments where you kind of went, "Fucking hell, man! I had a good job, and this, that, and the other. Look at how far I've sunk. How what's become of me? None of this."
I did, yeah, definitely, and it made me use more because I just wanted to block that out.
Yeah,
I knew I was fucked at that point. And I used more to just block out that feeling, that sort of, that thought of how much I'd lost, and how much I was continuing to lose. But, I mean, with the injecting thing as well, what was weird was I had it was almost like the ritual, the scoring, the heating up the spoon, the injecting was as important as the drug itself. I used to love watching the blood go into the syringe. I used to think it looked beautiful because it meant I'd hit a vein,
Yeah.
Which is really strange.
Yeah, it's a very, very sad sort of beauty.
It is, yeah. And I think I'd been using about 5 years, and my family obviously were aware of it by this time, and I was really in trouble. So I went to my local drug agency. It was the first time I went into rehab, and I went into rehab for 3 months. It called itself a 12-step rehab. It wasn't really. They sort of gave you a big book, said read it if you like. I was purportedly taken up to step 4, didn't understand any of it, left without a program. And the day I left, I thought it'd be a good idea to have a couple of beers with my mate, because I hadn't admitted I was an alcoholic at that stage. I had a couple of, and there was no such thing as a couple of beers in my case, you know. And the next day I had a needle in my arm. And I remember going to school that day, I knew exactly what was going to happen. I had tears rolling down my face because I didn't want to do it and I couldn't stop myself. I just knew it was going to happen.
Mm. How did it progress from there towards your rock bottom then?
My real rock bottom, I thought I'd hit rock bottom with heroin. My teeth fell out. I had no veins left. I was injecting in my neck. I'd lost everything. During that time, I put crack cocaine into the mix because, hey, I'm fucked. I might as well get even more fucked, you know. My real rock bottom came when I went into treatment this year, or actually my rock bottom came last year. And it was when I'd lost the delusion that it was ever going to get better. You know, you spend so many years saying, tomorrow I'll get a handle on it, this time it will be different, I'll be able to control it.
How many years did you spend doing that, just that?
Well, my addiction to heroin lasted 25 years. I stopped taking heroin. I won't say given up because that implies some positive intent on my part. I stopped taking heroin about 7 years ago. Because the quality was crap compared with where I started, I was on a big methadone script, and I discovered crack cocaine by that time. And my logic told me that if I didn't use heroin, I'd have more money to spend on crack. And
I'm assuming crack is a bit easier simply also because you don't have to inject it.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was a new buzz, you know.
Yeah. We exchange things, don't we?
Exactly.
Yeah,
and so, I mean, I was on heroin for 25 years, and then for the last 7 years of my using, it was alcohol and crack. And this sounds really strange again. When I took heroin out of the equation, the balance, the chemical balance seemed to go out of what, you know, of the equation of my using, because it spiraled out of control very quickly on alcohol and crack.
Just a second here. Are we implying that you found some sort of, in the biggest quotation marks there are, stability in daily heroin use in 25 years that then was sort of put out of joint by switching to crack and increased alcohol use?
Well, there seemed to be, with alcohol, heroin and crack, I seem to maintain some sort of equilibrium.
Right. Okay.
Which sounds really crazy.
Yeah.
And it is really crazy. But things really spiraled out of control. My alcohol use increased drastically, right. And so did my crack use quite quickly. And then last year, I'd really lost the delusion that anything was ever going to get better, and I really saw no way out.
Right.
And, you know, in Bill's story, when he says, you know, he was facing either the asylum or an early death. And I welcomed the idea of early death by that stage.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was after 32 years of telling yourself that somehow tomorrow it's going to get better.
Yeah.
That you realized actually it's not going to get better, and that's how you hit rock bottom.
Yeah. And I didn't. I actually stopped wanting to live. I stopped, you know.
Which neatly leads us to our question 4, which is, did you ever want to die at your worst? Did you consider suicide?
Yeah, I did. At that stage, I did want to die, and I would never have considered myself suicidal before, but I was so broken by that stage, and I really thought this is never going to end, you know. I tried to commit suicide last year, and this was not, my mum had died not long before, like months before. So I didn't consider what this would do to my stepdad or anyone else, you know.
Yeah.
This was just after my mum had died. And I woke up in hospital attached to drips and everything. I discharged myself. I went straight to the off license and got a cab to my crack dealer. But
we should very quickly at this point say that if you're feeling like this today, if you're feeling like there's no point in anything, if you're feeling like everyone around you would be better off without you, speak up. Speak to anyone, call an ambulance, call the suicide prevention hotline, the numbers in the show notes. It doesn't have to be like this. We need to talk about it because that's where our disease will lead us unless we find recovery. So we need to talk about it. But if that's where you are, get in touch with someone. Doesn't matter who it is, anyone will do.
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
And the thing that did, and I'm now looking back, I think, God had other plans for me that day, because I planned not to wake up. And when I woke up, I didn't think God's got another plan for me. I thought, oh, fuck, I can't even get that right, But that afternoon when I got back from the hospital and my dealers, and I'd had the, best part of a bottle of vodka, and I was on the pipe, I picked up the phone and rang the drug agency that I'd been attached to when I was using heroin and methadone. And very tearfully, with a crack pipe in my hand, said, I need help.
Right.
And that started a process that got me into treatment.
Yeah. Before we go there, very quickly, our question 5 is, what other methods did you try to get sober before finding the rooms?
I'd been in 3 previous rehabs back in the day, in my sort of 30s, my late 20s and 30s. Or I say 3. One of them only lasted 2 days, and that was because I'd said I would go there to get out of the prison sentence because I was facing charges of drug dealing. The first rehab is the one I told you about earlier. And after being out for 6 months and using it again for 6 months, I went back to the same treatment centre, but this time I got kicked out for using in the treatment centre. And after I was arrested, I made a commitment to go into treatment so I could get out of the charge, and I went into the Priory for 2 days and left. I'd also tried drug agency stuff, so sort of group therapy, psychotherapy, counselling. I had a drug agency worker say to me once, Andrew, why don't you try stopping for 1 or 2 days a week? And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't even stop for 1 or 2 hours a day. But mostly I think I lived with the delusion that I would get a handle on it, tomorrow. And tomorrow never came, obviously,
Right.
I thought, well, I'll stop at some point. I'll be able to stop at one point on my own self-propulsion.
Yeah, that was the big deal for me. That was, obviously, it's, if you're looking at it from sort of rationally, if we can try, from somebody else's point of view, maybe, if we're looking at it halfway rationally, is I keep telling myself that I can fix this problem when really I have a problem that I cannot fix by myself. For us, it's like the biggest deal in the world. Oh my God, but at some point I realized I can't fix this problem myself. So what is the obvious answer to that? I need help from an outside source. What seems to be so simple is the biggest step when you're in active addiction, to find and accept that you cannot, for the life of you, fix this problem alone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it took me a long while to realize that.
Yeah.
And it was only this time, when I went into treatment this time, that I actually accepted that, because the evidence was staring me in the face. I was so broken and so beat up, and I'd tried for so long. I'd been using for 40 years, and I had to finally put my hands up and say, I'm beaten.
Our question 6 is, so this is when you then entered the rehab, and it's a 12-step rehab that you went to. Our question 6 is, did you struggle with the word God?
Absolutely. Totally. I struggled with the whole thing to start with. I came out of the detox. I thought I was quite well out of detox, but somebody who was there when I arrived said later on, no, man, you look like you'd been dug up, And it was true. I didn't have the strength to carry my bag up the steps. The guy who picked me up from detox had to carry my bag for me.
Right.
And I was met on the steps by this very gruff, intimidating Yorkshireman who put a blue book in my hand and said, this will save your life. And because of the time I arrived, I was put straight into a 2-hour big book study, and I'm sitting there thinking, what are they talking about?
Oh, wow.
And my head was telling me, Andrew, you don't need to be here. You don't need all this. You've done a detox. You're all right. You'll be all right this time. That head, that voice in your head, your illness talking to you. And I was adamant I was going to leave that day, But the thing I did differently, I would have usually just walked out with my bag. The thing I did differently, I told anyone that would listen, I'm going to leave. And so people were persuading me to stay on an hourly basis to start with. And the next morning I met my counsellor, my teacher in treatment, a guy called Young. And he sat
formerly
me down.
of this parish and friend of the pod, yes.
And I was in the first of his steps lectures, and he said, welcome, Andrew. And I said, thank you very much, but I'm going home. So he sat me down afterwards. And I said, I can't do this, young. This might work for you, but it doesn't work for me. And he explained very kindly that I wasn't special and different, that I was a bog standard drug addict and alcoholic, but he was. And he said some very, very things that I remember very distinctly. He said, Andrew, you look totally ravaged by drinking drugs. He said, and I can just sense that bit of desperation holding on inside you. And he said, will you make a commitment that you'll at least stay here till Monday? And if you still feel the same, I think his words were, the door is open, your misery is waiting for you. And he told me later that he didn't really have much hope that I'd be there on Monday morning, but I was, because something clicked over the weekend. Something in my mind clicked, and I said to myself, Andrew, you really need to do this, because you're not going to get this chance again. You won't live long enough. And I won't say I immediately threw myself in. I'd conceded that I had to be there. But gradually over the time there, I went from being, I think the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions describes skeptical and suspicious newcomers. Well, I was the skeptical and suspicious guy at the back of the lecture room in Young's lectures. And I moved gradually from that person to being the guy that was first in the room in the morning, taking the notes off the board meticulously, listening to every word, really taking it in. But the God bit, that shouted at me from the steps when I walked in and saw the steps on the wall.
On the scroll or on the wall,
Especially as very early on, Young said to me, well, you need to be praying and meditating. I was like, did I say I'd do anything? But I did. I was made to see that it's my old ideas of religion, my old prejudice, that was blocking me off from that. And I think the thing was, because I was really desperate and I could see I was really broken, I was willing to follow suggestions. I had willingness. I didn't have much else, but I had willingness. And that willingness gave me a bit of open-mindedness, And and I started praying. The two guys I shared a room with had been there a bit longer. They were praying, so I copied them. And I didn't know what I was praying for. It felt very weird, very mechanical. I didn't think there was anything there, but I did it anyway. And I think I started just praying for these obsessive thoughts of drinking and using to be gone, Please rid me of these thoughts of drinking and using, because in the early days of treatment, I was thinking about it all the time. I said this to Young quite early on, and he said, how long were you drinking and using? I said, 40 years. He said, how long have you been here? I said, 10 days,
That, what you described there, between that conversation and then the Monday where that you committed to, and can you go back to that just for a moment? How many days were there? 4, 5, maybe, something like that?
It didn't take long, actually, because I think I spoke to Young on the Thursday when I arrived on a Wednesday, and it was really over the Saturday and Sunday that something sort of snapped in me, and I thought, no, you can't leave here. You won't make it.
And is that how that manifested? Is that all that you were thinking, or were there any other thoughts around this?
I can't really remember. I can remember distinctly when it happened, because obviously I wasn't sleeping. So, I was sitting in the bathroom. We had a big sash window in the bathroom looking out on the sky over Scarborough. And I remember sitting there looking out the window in the early hours of the morning. And I was crying. I cried quite a lot in those days.
Yeah.
Looking out makes me quite emotional thinking about it.
Yeah.
And I suppose you'd call it a moment of clarity.
No.
I just realised that I had to do this to save my life.
And that you wanted to save your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. We say, on the back of what we'd said earlier about where you'd been because you didn't want to save your life, you tried to end your life. So there's quite a turnaround.
Yeah. I realised I was being given a chance.
Yeah.
I was being given a second chance at life. And somebody shared in a meeting up there, they said, if you're a plane that's about to crash and someone gives you a parachute, for God's sake, pull the ripcord.
No. Beautifully said. Our question 7. How do you experience your higher power today? I mean, you've just shared a God moment, if ever there was one, right there, right? But you were suspicious. What did you say? Suspicious and skeptical. That's right. So you were suspicious and skeptical, like many of us are when we come into the program. How do you experience your higher power today?
Well, I start my day with connecting with my higher power. Probably the most important part of my day now is my prayer and meditation practice in the morning. That quiet time. I get up at 5 o'clock every morning, so that as my friend Vinny would say, I don't engage with earthlings before I engage with God.
Also a friend of this pod, of course, Vinny.
And my first experience of my higher power came in treatment when I was just practicing praying and that. And it's very hard to explain my own experience of God to someone else because everyone has their own experience of God. But I felt a change. On a basic level, I felt a commitment to this program. Mm-hmm. I suddenly became all in, and other people noticed that in me before I did. Mm. But I felt a presence. I felt like I wasn't alone on this journey. I really did. Mm. And it was of great comfort to me because I really wanted to connect with a power. Once I realised I was powerless and I needed a connection to power, I really wanted it to work. Mm. So I prayed with intent, and it worked for me.
Just step 3 experience, really.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And since I've been out of treatment, my relationship with God has only grown because I feel God's presence in everything I do. I try to place God at the centre of my life and my recovery. I feel God conscious as I go through my day. My behaviour doesn't always work, maybe, but I try and it's the way I treat people. The way I approach things, the way I want to help people. And since I've been out of treatment, God seems to put people in my path that I'm in a position to offer help to. Whether they accept it or not is another thing.
Yeah, you become this lightning rod, don't you?
Yeah. And I think it sounds, I don't mean this to sound grandiose in any way, but I think God's had a purpose for me now. I really do.
Yeah. Our question 8, which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you? So here you are, you have a step 3 experience, even though you didn't perhaps quite know, that it was that, and other people noticed it in you before you did, and so on, and you went through the steps. So which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you?
I think probably step 4, actually. Because I was in a treatment centre, you were given a certain amount of time to do your step 4. About 10 days, I suppose. And I don't think I picked up a pen until about sort of 2 days before, like when it was almost becoming too late.
I think it's a very common experience, that.
And it wasn't, I knew what I'd done. I was aware of everything I'd done. I was aware of my resentments. I understood it all. I was aware of my fears. I just putting it down in black and white on paper was a very uncomfortable experience for me. Because it's all right saying, I'm aware of it in my head, whatever. But actually seeing it in front of me.
There's something about writing it down that makes it experiential rather than theoretical, I think. Yeah. And when you write things down, it becomes more real, right, than thoughts in your head. They have a more ethereal quality, for lack of a better word, I suppose. But when you write it down, in the act of writing, that's why journaling and writing is so powerful. I think it just becomes real, putting things in black and white.
Yeah, and it is. It was like, once I'd written it down and I looked at this stuff, I thought, God, this is my life. This is awful.
Yeah. Question 9. Which character defects give you most trouble?
I'm quite judgmental. I like to feel quite superior sometimes, that exceptionalism that you talked about earlier. I can be quite fearful. The fear that I find hardest to let go of, and which has been a very negative effect throughout my life, is the fear of what other people think of me. Mm. Because that either makes me a people pleaser or it means I act up, I try and overachieve, it makes me arrogant, it makes me want to stand out, And I think that's quite hard for me to let go of sometimes. Of what other people think of me. And I feel I have to impress somebody or people please.
Pride in one way or another, I suppose.
Yeah.
I think pride is at the center of so many other defects, really. I think, I know that it is the one thing that is a real stumbling block for me. And having said that, someone in the room said some time ago that sometimes they can work in your favor as well. And it is true, because I didn't need to be humiliated overdosing and going through all of that rigmarole at the hospital and all the things that experience entailed. I thankfully only needed it once. And my pride was such that said, I will never, ever want to be seen to be in that sort of a state ever again. And it really, in a funny sort of way, helped me get there quicker, right? But by the same token, of course, it can stand in your way really in a profound way.
Yeah.
You know? Question 10. What's the best thing recovery has given you?
It's a hard question because recovery's given me so much. I mean, bearing in mind I've been using and drinking since my mid-teens, really. This is the first time I feel I've ever lived life properly. It's probably the first time I can say I've ever been happy. I wake up each morning now, I feel like I'm like a child, seeing the world for the first time. And everything's a new experience. One of the best things this program has given me, recovery has given me, is a connection to God, of having that connection in my life. It means so much to me now. And I nurture it and develop it. And really the best thing, the goal, I suppose, at the end of the program is being in a position to help other people. It gives me purpose in life. It means I'm contributing. It means I'm doing something positive for somebody else. I'm turning my thoughts away from myself. And, I'm sponsoring people now. I never believed I could say that. And, my first sponsee I'm taking through the work, you can see the lights come on. And his willingness grows the more he gets into it. And it's a beautiful thing. Because I want, when I see somebody struggling, when there's a newcomer in the rooms, I want somebody to have the joy and the freedom that I've been given today. I really do. And that's my purpose in life.
So isn't it really interesting that as addicts, one of the things that really seems to characterize us is this lack of purpose, right? And I don't know whether that is an inbuilt thing, right? Or if it's acquired, or whether, we read too much nihilistic literature and or interpret Nietzsche the wrong way or something, or whether this is just something that comes as part of the package, right? As one of those things like this incredible exceptionalism that we have. I mean, if you read Bill's story, it's full of exceptionalism and, this sense of, or the fact that we're so overly sensitive, or most of us appear to be so overly sensitive. And I've often asked myself whether this is just something that is inbuilt, this lack of purpose.
Possibly, yeah. I haven't really questioned it. I certainly felt a lack of purpose throughout my life before. I felt useless. I had no direction. I felt I had nothing to contribute to life. Certainly once I was drinking and using. And it's true, I didn't contribute a lot to life. I only took from life, really. And I like to think that what this program does is it sort of flips like a coin on the other side. When we go into the program, we're the exact opposite of the people we were in drinking and using.
It's true.
And I don't quite know how it works, and I don't question it. But it's changed the person I am entirely.
Yeah, you said this earlier.
They talk about psychic change. That's
You said this earlier, that you feel that, I'm paraphrasing, you've been given a second chance at life. This is something that appears on my grat list, every second or third day. We are, in storytelling terms, it's called the redemption arc, right? Where we sort of go out to undo the bad that we've done and make good for it, so to speak. And second chance at life is something that you said. Is that what you mean by this?
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. It talks in the book about being reborn, and that's how it feels.
Question 11. What would you say to a newcomer or someone wondering if they're an addict?
In the rooms, I would say, give yourself a break. Have an open mind. Listen, see if you identify with what the other guys in the room are saying. Listen to the chair, because if it's a good chair, what the chair will do is to share their experiences in addiction and their recovery, how they got into recovery and what recovery is doing for them, you know. As it says in the book, you know, we share our experiences for identification and we share recovery for hope. And if you think in any way that you can identify with the problems of addiction that whoever's speaking has got, then stick around, speak to somebody. Learn some more. Listen to other people's experiences. Take some phone numbers.
Yeah. In any case, you'll always be welcome, that's for sure. Whether you end up being an addict or whether you end up finding out that you're an addict or not, you're always welcome in the rooms. And our last question today, our question 12. What do you want your higher power to say to you at the pearly gates?
Oh, I've got to think about that. I think my higher power would say...
No, what do you want him to say? Not what do you think they might say, but what do you want them to say?
Welcome home.
Great. Thank you. Andrew, you were so courageous in your sharing and so honest and giving. I'd like to thank you for being my guest today on this episode of 12 Steps and 12 Questions.
Thanks, Silvio. Thank you for asking me.
Great. We're still rolling. That was a really great interview. Thank you so much, mate. Do you feel that you said everything that you wanted to say? Or is there anything that if you left out, you kind of go, oh, I should have said this?
Yeah, one thing I'll add, if I can. There's, as I say, my mum died, and it was such a great pain to me that my mum, who loved me so much and only wanted me to be happy,
yes,
never got to see me do this. And I did a spiritual amends to my mum. And I just hope today I'm making her proud.
Yeah. I bet you are. And who's to say that she doesn't see you today?
We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe. While this pod is based on the 12-step recovery program, it's not officially affiliated with any 12-step fellowship. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific, it's fully self-supporting and not-for-profit. And you know this next bit. It's not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, and it neither endorses nor opposes any causes.